Well, good afternoon again. It's Rian Kutsia from Fortis Proactive Defense Solutions in Pretoria. And today I have the honor again of speaking to you, Bryan Mennie, based in the UK for the last couple of years, still actively involved in the whole international security scene, and a great source of information and always entertaining to talk to you. Bryan, welcome.
Rian, thank you so much. Firstly, let me say it's a real privilege. The honor is all mine. It's a real privilege, as always, to chat with yourself, but also to your viewers, and I'm very grateful for all of the opportunities. Thank you for that stellar introduction. You're going to make me feel like James Bond, 002.5. That's my height. But yeah, thank you so much.
But next, I'll ask you for your autograph. So today we're gonna be diving into a very interesting subject. We're gonna be talking about human predators and how you can recognize them easier. So Bryan, let's kick off with this. How can understanding the different types of human predators help in identifying potential threats before an attack can occur?
Well, Rian, it's the psychology of victims and the psychology of predators and crimes is an amazingly fascinating subject, and it would take far more time than what we have to unpack it in its totality. Right. So I'm going to try and be as broad as possible. And to come back to it,
Yes.
Why is it important for us to understand these aspects, these elements in these various perspectives of looking at things? It's because crime and criminal engagement is a product of human nature. Human nature is, and human actions are predicated upon the motivations that they have, right? People will act in a certain way with regards the motivation that they have to achieve the goal that they set out to do. It sounds like a little bit of a waffle, but just bear with me. So I want to give you like the first, biggest, broadest differentiation. The human predator, the predator, predator like any other animal, right? That'll help us. Certainly those of us who really love nature and who look at how wild animals interact can see a lot of correlation there, because the humans, despite pretensions to the latter, are still animals, okay? So we share a large amount in common with the drive, etc., that influences predators in the wild. Okay, there are some differences, right? Because human psyche has got a little bit of a sick and twisted element to it, but we'll go there. It does exist in some animals. I'm not saying it doesn't. Anyway, now how's that for the waffle? Okay, coming back to this. So what are human predators? And by and large, there are two different types of predators. Okay, there are subtle distinctions. There's some crossover. But broadly speaking, we have resource predators and we have effect predators. Let's expand on that. A resource predator conducts their action to obtain something. They want to gather a resource, collect a resource. Think about a robber, right? They want to bring in something that will enrich themselves and benefit themselves, however they want to use it. But that is their motivation, right? Then you have an effect predator, somebody who wants to do something to another to fulfill some inner need, okay? Think rapist, right? That by and large is an effect predator. Think suicide bomber, an effect predator. Terrorism in general is a little nebulous, okay? Because people are quick to say, oh, well, there's terrorism. Yeah, there are lots of different types of predatorial actions within the terrorist element to it. By and large, most of it's for resource disguised as effect. But, elements like the suicide bombers, etc., absolutely a effect-driven predator. The people who manage them, more resource-driven, but That's a really in-depth discussion. Okay, so my really long-winded answer to your really simple question is the motivation, understanding it, because that dictates a large degree the actions that they will do, and also the consequences that they are willing to endure something. Because here's the other aspect. Every single action, right, generates consequence, and the consequence dictates the value that that resource or item or effect will give to that predator. In other words, the juice has got to be worth the squeeze for them to do what they do.
Okay.
So that is one of those key elements. Sorry, I'm interrupting you there. So that is one of those key elements why we need to understand the difference between the resource and the effect predator, because it is going to underscore how far they will push it.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to behaviors and patterns.
Mm-hmm.
What are some common behavioral patterns that criminals use or display to assess and approach their potential victims?
Okay, right. Now, again, I'm glad we underscored it with the motivations of it, right? Because the motivations are going to dictate how much effort and energy the criminal is willing to invest into the opportunity. Also, how much consequence they are prepared to endure for it. Okay, and that, of course, is going to dictate the tactics that they use, or the techniques or procedures. Okay, so. And we might have skipped a little bit ahead, but that's okay. I mean, we can circle back and we can add to this and we can flesh out the concept. But a predator is, or the criminal is going to have as the initial element to their behavior a period of observation, right? A period of information gathering, a period of understanding, right? It's going to be various phased, and that's going to dictate their action. They're going to want to understand the environment within which they move and are prepared to go and commit their crimes, or the one that best suits them both. That's why you have really well-known phenomena such as high crime areas relative to lower crime areas, right? So they're going to want to have the right environment. Again, depending on what they want to do, those crime areas are different, and those crime areas and the situation on the ground is going to be a large part of their own information collection. And then you're also going to see that they're going to be very involved with observation. Okay. Now, how that translates to recognizing a predator, that takes a certain amount of skill, and similarly to the psychology of criminal behavior in total, counter surveillance is another very, very in-depth topic. And again, we probably won't have time today to go through all the aspects of it. We will touch broadly on it, because counter surveillance is a very real and very, very powerful skill set to have.
Yes.
But we also come back to recognizing the behavior. So recognizing that surveillance, and then also recognizing certain other key aspects to it. So especially resource-driven predators always have to set up a tactic to close. Now, the close element is by and large within arm's reach. There are certain key differences. A suicide bomber doesn't have to be in arm's reach, but they still have to get pretty close to you, right? Yes. They want to close the distance of where they are. People have a very big misnomer from watching entirely too much Hollywood-driven, entertainment, is that they believe that a robbery is a very loud, very violent, very aggressive event. Whereas most often the case, it's an arm's distance. It's not even the presentation of a firearm or a knife, but it's a display under clothing and things like that. So by and large, the predator needs to apply the tactics to get within arm's distance, or at least to get closer to you without alerting you, right? I think we touched on that the last time we spoke, is the recognizing those closing tactics. And then also, there's other elements to it. As a criminal becomes more target fixated, they've now identified their target, they're happier with the environment, they also have this tendency to display a lot of other behavioral characteristics, right? So they'll start to mirror image the person that they're looking at, they're following, and that they're now fixated in upon. You'll see a lot of things like walking, becoming synchronized, movements broadly mirroring each other, and then, you know, as it sort of increases in terms of becoming closer to gaining the resource or implementing the effect, you'll see the behavior will almost always start to amp up a little bit. You're going to start seeing such patterns as things like predatory circling, especially when they've executed their the initial part of their closing strategies. Let's say, for example, they want to engage in conversation or whatever it is. You'll start to see relative to a person, you'll start to see circling, especially when there's two or three criminals in a group. You'll start to see other behavioral indications, such as what's called target glancing. So you'll see the sort of head movement that almost looks like it's on a pendulum, and that's a really clear body language indicator of looking at the target and then looking at the escape or the departure route beyond that. Sorry, you wanted to say
Bryan?
something?
Yeah, I just want to interject. My next two questions will be about predatorial body language and speech and vocal patterns. So while we're on this subject, let's just bring all of that into the discussion, and do it as a whole. So while you're talking about the behaviors and patterns, feel free to talk about the body language and excuse me, speech and vocal patterns as well. Yes.
Absolutely, right. I think it's also probably good to come back to a point I was making. So we see a lot of target selection, right? And predators, criminals. I'm going to use that term interchangeably as it sort of jumps into my head, right? But certainly if we look at wild predators, you'll see the same thing. We'll take the classic example, right? There's the lion. It's looking, the lioness usually, looking for her prey. And she's going to be looking at the herd, herd being a defensive mechanism by prey animals or by lunch, right? To try and not be lunch. You're going to look at that, and they're going to start looking at specific animals that they want to target. What is the other element to the adage is that it's the sick, it's the lame, it's the lazy that become lunch, right? And you'll certainly see human predators, criminals look for that same aspect, but it's not so much it's not quite as simplistic. No, that's not true. It's both as simplistic, but also a little bit more nuanced and complicated what's looked for. And I want to try and summarize it. Yes, they do look for physical weakness, especially when you delve into those effect predators, right?
Yeah.
They want to look for a target that they can dominate easily. Their tolerance for risk, for example, a rapist is typically a little bit lower than, say, for example, a suicide bomber who really doesn't care if they live and die, right? They want to go out in a puff of smoke and and be where are they? Well, they're over there, and up there, right? So they have a far higher tolerance for risk, but a rapist generally does not want to get caught. So, and they certainly want to gain the experience that they're seeking, or the sensational, however it's best described. So they're going to do a fairly sophisticated and usually very good job of selecting the target. And what they're going to look for is a combination of physical, the physical imbalance. Now, what am I saying? Do powerlifters or CrossFit champions never get targeted for that sort of abuse? No, that's not what I'm saying. It does happen. It happens to a far lesser degree, and usually the predation method is far more psychological than physical. Okay, but if you're talking about the environment where the target is selected, there's no opportunity for that longer term psychological predation or psychological domination, it needs to be far more physical. Then the criminals absolutely look in their victims for that force disparity, right? That power. They're looking for somebody weaker. Let me make it a little bit simpler. They're also looking for people who are unsure of where they are looking uncertain of what they should be doing, of people who are questioning themselves. And the reason that this is so attractive to any type of predator is it allows and facilitates the close. Let me explain.
Okay.
Us as human animals, right? And if you, as you have, had conversations with people who seek out training, etc., what is one of the most powerful common themes that people seek is that definitive indicator that something is happening, right? Talk about a vehicle hijack. People want to know, they want to be able to look at the person and say, what they are doing is absolutely 100% the threat. Okay.
Yes.
The criminal understands this. The criminal understands that people seek that sort of clarity. But they know, because they are by and large really good students of human behavior, that people love to question themselves. So they look at something and they think, oh no, that can't be what it is. I must be mistaken. I must be, and having and displaying an unsure mindset. In fact, being unsure, not quite sure where you are, not quite sure what the situation or the environment, adds to that very, very powerful human nature response of questioning the evidence of the reality in front of you and putting and projecting excuses upon it, right? Criminals love that, because whilst you're thinking about this, I don't know if you've touched on OODA loop a lot in your videos, and I don't want to rehash that, but it is in essence the OODA element of the loop, and being unsure elongates your ability to understand what is happening or to accept what is happening. You understand, but you don't accept, right? And that gives the criminals a much easier pathway to close, to be within touching distance, to be able to implement the actions that they're doing. So they very much look for people who are less sure and assured than others, right?
Yes.
How this is projected in terms of your own body language, what you present into the world, is varied, right? It could be, in a general sense, just looking lost. It is most often projected in your stride, your gait, right? They did a really, really interesting study where they took a bunch of career criminals, convicted criminals, felons, and it was in the United States, so felons is the correct term. And they showed a whole bunch of clips of people just walking, right? And they said, they asked, or the question was, which one of these people, these individuals, would you target for the type of crime that you have been accused of and that you would commit? Okay. And the video that they showed of these was a cross-section of people, a control group of people who had never been impacted by crime, and then people who were victims of crime. And I think it was like a 98% selection accuracy. I can't recall the exact figures, nor can I recall the name of the study. But yes, it was one of the Stanford studies. That much I do remember. This is certainly something that Kelly McCann in his training, elucidates upon. But the accuracy with which they just looked at a person, primarily based on their stride and their demeanor, and they selected those who had previously been victims of crime, is uncanny. Okay. So you need to understand then a lot of what you are putting out about yourself. And I think we might have lost a little bit of the flow, but again, as you said, it's an interesting topic nonetheless, is what you project as a person. And it's primarily about not being sure, right? It's also about not understanding the environment. And then the other lovely thing, you can't see it now, there we go, is not paying attention, because we all fixated, so many people are fixated in this transparent or transplanted brain that we put in our hands and in our pockets, right? That they cut themselves out from the world, right? And amazing what that little bit of distraction does to people.
Yes.
Why you have people walking into lamp poles and everything. Sorry, I might have gone up beyond a little bit what you wanted to ask. But I can just give me 1 second. I'll just sort of come back to other aspects of your own profile
Okay.
that you address. So we touched on stride, and stride is also about the rate. Too fast is an indicator, too slow is an indicator. I know, complicated, right? But you got to hit the right balance, the right weight for you, the fluidity with which you move, people who move in a disjointed manner. Unfortunately, people who've had mobility injuries, right? We were talking about that just now. You're walking around with a little bit of a hip issue or a knee issue, you increase your target profile. Okay. Distraction, again, as I said, incredibly powerful. Projected confusion, being a little bit lost, not knowing where you are, looking around, looking at Google Maps, looking up, etc., etc. And then other aspects like opportunity, and then again, here's the old classic, right? Is value indicators. Value indicators, especially for resource predators.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we all know why a Rolex exists, right? You still there?
I'm here. I'm
Okay.
listening.
Sorry, my screen just died for a second. Just let me get it back up and going. We all know what a Rolex is, right? Or certainly anybody who's worked anywhere in Africa knows what a Rolex is. It's the last plane ticket. Okay.
Yes.
It's the negotiating tool. It's the thing that means you will never get left behind, because you can always trade it for something. But those type of ostentatious displays of wealth, right? The latest iPhone, the Gucci sunglasses, or whatever it is, as much as they are nice to wear and people get really invested in those displays, it it puts you in the profile, right? It makes you stand out from the crowd, and the more that happens, the more you get identified. Sorry, you wanted to ask another question.
Bryan, yeah, let's touch on things like when a criminal is sort of preparing to pounce, target lancing, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so again, let's come back to the one aspect, right, that I said is there needs to be a method to close, okay, or there needs to be a strategy to close. And again, the misunderstanding is that a lot of people say, well, I'm easily going to identify a criminal, etc., etc., and that is always possible, but it's certainly if you're distracted and you're not thinking and you're unsure of yourself and you're not really aware of what the baseline should be in your environment. That's another interesting concept we can come back to. You're going to see that these strategies for closure can become very, very, very successful, right? And they're very adaptable. And I've seen it a lot. So we kind of touched on this a little bit last time about travel scams and things like that. But one of the things that I've seen as a strategy for closing is drop a pair of sunglasses, right? You have a street vendor or something like that. He drops a pair of sunglasses off his tray, right? Or walks in your way by accident and then knocks the sunglasses off your tray and uses either you stopping or you bending over to pick it up, help them, etc., as that strategy for closure. Asking directions, asking for cigarettes.
Asking the time.
Although, typically the time asking one still gives quite a bit of standoff distance, especially if somebody's a little bit more schooled. But here's the great thing. You're asking for directions and you hold your phone up, okay? And you open it to Google Maps. The great thing about the phone thing is, it kind of positions you as somebody who already has a resource. You have a phone. You have an iPhone. You must be trustworthy, right? Because only the really trustworthy people have iPhones. Okay, and then it also allows a person to really very neatly, especially if you want to share the screen or say, hey, I'm a little lost. Here's my map. I don't know where I am. Can you maybe show me where this is, etc. And on the screen, you're creating two elements that are super powerful. Is somebody who's asking for help. People are usually fairly naturally drawn to helping out other people, right? And you also you shared something that everyone's really accustomed to, right, has schooled themselves to be the distraction device. So they go from looking up and around and they're looking right into the phone. And that is a beautiful opener for somebody else to come, pickpockets, somebody else to come and stick a little knife in your back and say, quiet now, etc. You get where I'm going. So this phone is, oh man, it's used as that closing technique so well and so often. Okay. Distractions, absolutely, right. Appearing to be disabled, handicapped, all of those sort of things, all of those where it's getting something that you as a person are naturally extending yourself to go and help, and all of that. It's very, very powerful. And it's also very powerful because most people, they don't want to be the person that doesn't help. People are really powerfully motivated to help somebody else out, right? Because they can say, well, if I was in that position, would I want to be helped, and all of that sort of thing. Yes. So again, that sort of, that closing technique, that's such a big key indicator, and it's both really easy and really difficult to see, right?
Yes, because they're so good with it. Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. And it's just positioned so well on human psyche.
So, Bryan, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here,
okay.
For time limits. And then, because I still want to discuss clothing and appearance, I want to get back again to pre-assault indicators. And also, last but definitely not least, avoidance and response. So I think let's discuss that in a second video. So we make this a two-part video. So Bryan, thank you for your inputs, and we will chat again very soon.